So, Annette, I know you've got a paper that's almost ready to be submitted. You're going to submit it, I think, next week, and you've managed to rewrite it substantially and make it ready for submission since the beginning of August. So it's like been 2 months, but then you've been sick for 5 weeks, so kind of like, maybe a month or so. How did you do that? Like, I mean, how do you go about kind of rewriting a paper that was desk rejected to make it ready for submission?
Yeah, it's actually, I basically submitted parts of it for feedback to one of the coaches, and by doing that, it just made me realize, all the little things that I, in theory, know and that I've heard in the modules that you talk about, but that I never did. So through, I guess, the writing routines that I developed, I just had these these big mistakes in there that just I never even realized were there, despite maybe somewhere in my head knowing it. And by just submitting these pieces, I got really aware of where these areas are and what I need to work on and what I needed to revise. And it's also, since I'm not a native speaker of English, so it was also good to have that feedback to see, okay, so here I have all of these native language interference. So it sounds too German in order to be really understandable to somebody who speaks English. And just having those feedback loops was really, really invaluable in order to just revise this paper and get it ready to be submitted again.
You mentioned that there were some mistakes or big mistakes in it. Can you give an example of a mistake like that you kind of, maybe you hadn't realized that you were there, and it was through this feedback that it opened your eyes, or were like, oh my God, this is a really big mistake that I need to fix?
I think one of the structural issues that I was having is like just structure of a paragraph, like having a lead sentence, having some sort of seclusion and putting the evidence in between. And, in theory, I know all of this stuff, but through the feedback and looking at the paragraph structures that I had actually written, like there were many, many paragraphs who were like one sentence paragraphs or paragraphs that were missing crucial parts. And just then paying more attention to those kind of details, I think really helped. And then also just getting in the habit of using a lot of colloquial language. So a lot of spoken language that isn't very formal, that may not work in an academic writing setting.
Yeah, and I guess one big question about feedback that we often get from people is, the coach that you've been working with, she's not in social sciences, diversity in organizations, immigration that you're kind of researching. And we often get the question like, yeah, how can somebody from a different field help me rewrite my paper in my field because they don't understand my research? And maybe you can give some insights how that worked for you.
Yeah, I think it was actually good that my coach had absolutely no idea of the field that I was in, because that just, made it so much easier for her to basically tell me, I don't understand what you're trying to say here, or I don't understand what this is about. And to then realize, okay, this is not an issue of, I don't know, she doesn't have enough knowledge about the field, but an issue of the way that I'm using language in order to basically get these ideas across. I'm in social science, and so it's a really broad field. We have a lot of different areas of expertise within it. So not everybody in social science will also understand a very specific area that I work on. And so just being able to communicate your ideas, to communicate what you're trying to say, what you're researching to people who don't necessarily have that expert knowledge, I think is just invaluable. And then having somebody who is an outsider might be the best way of coaching, and rather than having somebody who's an insider and who knows all the bits and who then, infers their own knowledge and may not pick up on the areas where you're not really clear about what you want to say.
I think on the surface level, it's kind of counterintuitive, because you'd think that you need to work with somebody who's in your field in order to be able to write a better paper, isn't it? It kind of makes sense. So whereas it's kind of counterintuitive that somebody who's not in your field can actually help you pretty well to rewrite your paper, isn't it?
Yeah, I think for having somebody in your field, I think they're really invaluable, and maybe pointing you to a theory that you might not have known about before, pointing you to a specific journal that they think your research might fit in really well. So doing more of the selling part of it, where do I want to sell it, and the academic bit, what kind of theory should I use, what kind of concepts should I apply to the research. And then, but that's not really how I understand the program you're doing, right? Because you're about writing effectively and communicating your ideas effectively. And for that task, I think somebody who isn't in your field, who isn't a specialist in that very specific research area that you're working on, is really an invaluable resource.
So it was feedback, that kind of regular feedback that helps you to rewrite the paper. Any sort of other steps that you took that maybe can help other people whose papers have been rejected or they need major revisions, and I suppose you're feeling down, you're feeling frustrated? What else do you do apart from trying to get regular feedback on it?
Yeah, I also watched the modules. I watched the course modules. I've worked through not all, but quite a few of the worksheets for other paper ideas that I have. Because honestly, I can't work on one paper for weeks and weeks and weeks at a time. I do need outlets to think of other things and to think of other ideas. And sometimes that's the other work I do, the other projects I have, the other writing, the workshops, all the other stuff that I do. And sometimes that's just thinking about and developing other ideas, and then coming back to that paper and looking at it with like 2 or 3 days distance, and then seeing other bits and pieces again that you may not have noticed before. I think that's also something that really helped. And also just listening to your, maybe I'm a bit weird, but I've listened to the lectures multiple times. I listen to them at night when I go to bed, because for some reason, just reinforcing these things, even though I've heard them a million times, and I've taught undergraduate writing classes at some point, it's still good to just be reminded. It's sort of this reaffirmation of constant reminder. Okay, these are the points that you need to really focus on, and these are the things that you need to incorporate in order to be successful.
Yeah, and I suppose there is also the thing that you might know what to do, but then you either forget to do it or you're not able to do it 100% when you actually try to implement it, right? Like you were saying with the paragraphs, you kind of knew that how paragraphs should be structured in a research paper, but then you didn't apply it correctly in your own paper.
Yeah, exactly. So just having that reinforcement and these multiple, on the one side, the theoretical through the lectures, and then on the other side, having that practical reinforcement through the feedback, I think that really helped to just make me much more aware of how I write and how I go about writing. And I also used to be very unstructured in my writing. I used to be okay, here's a page and I just write. And then I revise a million times before it becomes something that is good to show somebody else. And I think by just focusing on these very structural things, it's just made me think about how I write much differently.
What do you do right now? So, you mentioned that you were kind of writing whatever came to your mind and then rewriting it a million times. What do you do now that is more efficient?
Yeah, so right now I'm actually starting a new paper right now. I made myself an outline, which, I guess that's something that people do. I made myself an outline and I just started to keyword the most important things that I needed to have in each paragraph. And I started to write out the most important bits and pieces, like what is the gap that I want to address, and try to formulate that in a really coherent way. What's the contribution I'm making? What is the result of the study? Just writing these pieces together and having sort of this big outline with the most important facts in there, so that I can actually put it next to myself and just be reminded as I write the broader text, like, the findings section. That's, for qualitative research, that's a bit of a longer section. You write in a certain style, and sometimes the writing goes places where you not necessarily arrive at the end that you want to arrive at. And by just having that outline and that structure right next to me, it just keeps reminding me, okay, this is where I'm going, and this is the area I want to address. This is the issue I'm focusing on. And so I feel like I'm much more focused in what I write.
How do you maintain the habit of writing? Because you have a family, you work as a postdoctoral researcher. I'm sure that you're busy. So how do you actually maintain that habit of writing, rewriting, structuring your paper? Because sometimes, it happens that people don't write for weeks or months, So how is it that you're able to keep up the writing habit?
It's hard. honestly, like it's not an easy, it's for me a lot of being flexible with my writing times. For the longest time, I was at okay, I can only write in the mornings and I can only write between, I don't know, 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. And then really, I mean, this is pre your course actually. During Corona, I was forced because we had to restructure the way that we organize our lives with a kid at home and, different times that we were now able to actually put in work. I found out, no, I can actually also write in the afternoon. It might not be as focused, it might not be as good, but I can still do it. And so then using that to schedule around my other appointments, because I do have quite a few of other appointments, I just block time in my Outlook calendar. So, maybe I'm lucky that way because most of my appointments, people just look at my Outlook calendar and suggest times that they may be available or that they want to meet at. And so if I do block these, I do have the time to write. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I write for 2 hours every day. I might also use that time to read something and then write for an hour, but I still have that time blocked. And that's also, sometimes it doesn't happen. Like when I'm at conferences, it's really hard to do that. And I'm usually not successful at doing it, but then getting back into scheduling, I mean, that's what's worked for me, but also being flexible about when I schedule these times and not giving myself negative spaces where I convince myself that I can't write during that time or something like that.
And I think those blocks of time that you mentioned and like actually putting it in your calendar is such a simple but undervalued and underused strategy. When I started doing it, actually putting everything on my calendar and blocking it, like it changed my life completely. Because as you say, if your calendar is blocked and you're a researcher and other people want appointments with you, well, they can't book it because it's blocked. And it's your writing time or it's your reading time or whatever other time you have, and I think it's just such an underused strategy. If people are very busy and they have problems writing regularly, at least for me, that kind of changes the game completely. Just scheduling those blogs, be it daily or maybe 3 times a week, whatever your schedule allows, right? But just having it there in your schedule is so helpful.
Absolutely. And I mean, as I said, you like also allowing yourself to be flexible with it and also allowing yourself to maybe have a week where it doesn't work out because I don't know, you're in the field doing research. I mean, when I'm in the field, like I can't sit down and just write for 2 hours. So then those are days that I don't block that time, but then not guilting myself into, I didn't schedule that time, I think is important too.
It is, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, now with the small child that we've got, we also had to change our routine, my routine. And, for example, I used to go to the gym every morning and I thought that was the best time for me to go to the gym. And that's the only time I want to go to the gym, but I had to change it. Now I go in the afternoon. And so you have to have that flexibility, but nevertheless, like I need my writing space, for example, it needs to be in my calendar, whether it's in the afternoon or in the morning. It might not be there 5 times a week, but it needs to be there because otherwise you just get out of shape and you stop doing it, right?
Absolutely. And as I said, there's weeks when that works really well, and then there's other weeks where it doesn't work really well.
So what would you say, has been like the biggest learning lesson or the biggest transformation for you since August? We talked about feedback, we talked about the writing routine. What would you say for you is like the biggest takeaway so far since the beginning of August that you joined?
I think honestly, just being reflexive about my writing. As I said, I think I've gotten into all of these really bad habits, into all of these writing habits that I didn't even realize were there. And then just being reflexive about, what am I actually doing? Like, what is my goal and why am I doing it? And then being open to feedback. I mean, quite honestly, the first time I sent feedback to the coach, the page came back with tons of red. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a lot of feedback and it's a lot of changes. And apparently I'm a really bad writer. Which was my initial reaction, and then I was like, no, wait, if I go about it this way, like it's not gonna help me. It's gonna make me feel bad. It's gonna make me want to write even less. And so just being open to getting all of that feedback and seeing it as something that's positive, and then also like I actually have a list of all the things that I watch out for when I write too. That's not on my computer. It's in it's in this wonderful book, and I have it next to me when I write. And then so I can go back and be like, oh yeah, this is something you wanted to pay attention to. And so having, that self-reflexivity.
How does one like overcome this fear of feedback? Or, well, maybe not fear, but like for some people it's anger, it's frustration. For others it's fear. It's like, it's my paper, I've worked on it for such a long time. How dare you, criticize it? There is inevitably, I know it myself when, my paper comes back from the journal with reviewers' comments, you might get angry and stuff like that. How do you overcome this sort of negativity maybe towards feedback so that you can actually apply it and progress and get feedback more often?
I don't know. For me, it's a personal thing. Like, I like to learn. Like, I've learned over the years that if you just take it all negatively, like, and just eat it into you, it doesn't do good things for your mental health, and it doesn't get you any further. Like, if, people generally, like all my advisors that I've had over the years, all the people that I work with, the people that I sort of see as mentors, like, they don't necessarily want anything bad to happen to me. Quite the opposite, right? So if I just block their feedback, and if I go about it, oh no, it affects my health, my mental health negatively, and it doesn't get me any further. And so, just as I said, being open, being reflexive about yourself and yourself in the process, and just also realizing, okay, people don't want to hurt me. I mean, for the most part, right? I think that's how at least I go about it.
What is your research about, and why is it important? You talked a lot about the writing process, the writing routine, but why is your research important, and what is it about?
Yeah, so I do research on diversity and anti-discrimination work in organizations. So it's all about making organizations have certain structures more open to diverse employees, to diverse opinions, basically also adapt to a migration-driven, diverse society that Germany, for this part, actually has become. And so I think what's most important for me is to actually like contribute at least a tiny little bit to some form of equality. Just if I make one person see that, oh, maybe that HR method that we're using currently is not contributing to opening our organization to people from all kinds of different social backgrounds, then I think that might, change something in the way that we go about living together.
Can you give an example of, let's say one HR recruitment practice maybe that can lead to a lot of discrimination?
In Germany in particular, HR in certain areas will look at what they call the regular study time. So how long did it take you to acquire a bachelor's degree? How long did it take you to acquire a master's degree? And obviously for people who are, who don't have any other responsibilities, who, have maybe their parents financing their studies, they can stay within the 3-5 years, whatever it is that the regular time is. For people who may have family care responsibilities, for people who have to work while they study, that's not possible. And so counting those factors against you may privilege people that already enjoy a lot of privilege in society. Yeah, so that's just one small example. Or even, the GPA, I guess you'd say in America, that you had as your final GPA note, whatever, it's a 4.0 in America, that's the best that you could get. It's something else in Germany. So also judging by these very, very hard criteria may, by definition, exclude certain groups that may be really valuable employees and may bring really valuable opinions to your organization that you don't even invite to an interview because you've already ruled them out.
Well, what's your take on more double-blind recruitment processes? There's this famous, well, not an experiment, but the famous case of, I think it was New York City Orchestra, where for decades and decades there were no women in the orchestra. And at that time, that was probably like the 30s, everybody was saying, well, women can't play musical instruments, they're not good enough to be in the orchestra, they should stay at home, those kind of nonsensical things. And what turned out is, at some point, I don't know why, I can't remember, maybe you know that story, they just put a blind, basically a wall separating the judges from the candidates who were playing instruments. And immediately they started hiring women because the judges couldn't see who the person was. They couldn't see the name, the face, the skin color, the gender, nothing. They could just hear the music. And I can't remember the exact statistics, but it shot up from like 0 to, I don't know if it's like 50-50 now in major orchestras, but the percentage of women has risen significantly. So I don't know if that's something that you studied as well, or what's your take on that in sort of like more non-musical settings, whether that could actually be applied for recruitment.
Right. So yeah, I agree. We did sort of study that. At least we studied attitudes of people who may potentially apply to certain jobs if they thought that it was a good thing that they had these sort of double-blind procedures in place, and if they thought that it did something to help them actually be invited. And it's actually interesting because they said it was good that they had it, but they didn't think that it would work to give them better chances to get the job. And so what I take from that is, like these double-blind things are also connected to the idea of merit, right? Like everybody has the same chances, everybody's able to achieve the same, and we judge solely based on those achievements. If you have a system that's already skewed towards certain groups and already disadvantages certain other groups in, let's say, the education, then all you're doing by putting in blinders is, you're cutting out factors that might contribute to you thinking about, okay, is there some factor that might have contributed to that person not meeting that standard study time, not meeting the best GPA that they could have gotten? But I think at least for the population that we studied, is pretty clear that the people do like that there's some kind of initiative, some kind of sign of an organization that says, okay, yeah, we do value diversity and we do want a diverse employee pool from groups that are socially disadvantaged, that do experience discrimination in the labor market, but there's no belief in the meritocracy and the fact that everybody has the same chances and everybody can achieve the same.
Maybe I just want to end by asking you, you decided to start working with us sort of end of July, beginning of August, and you've got a paper ready to be submitted. You started working on another paper. So what would you say to maybe people who are, I don't know, on the fence? They're kind of thinking, is this going to be a good fit for me? Should I join? Should I try it or not? I've seen Marek's videos.
I think it's worth trying. I mean, it's worth getting feedback out of your bubble. We have, we all have our own feedback bubbles that are, very familiar with what we're doing, with who we are, with what our work is. I think just to get out of this bubble, especially if you've experienced all of these setbacks, if you've submitted papers and they've been rejected multiple times, it's just a really, really valuable resource to have and to invest in, because I mean, in the end, as researchers, we do need to publish, we do need to write papers, and this will get you out of your comfort zone, but in a good way, and make you more reflexive, more aware of your own writing and what you're doing in the text.